We are living in different times here. The COVID pandemic did a number on our culture, of attending things. And it's been hard in the last 5 years or so to get people to show up. But I'm glad you're here. And thank you for showing up for this important symposium. So before we even begin, I'd ask that you give yourselves a round of applause just for being here. Thank you. So welcome to East Lansing, welcome to Michigan State University, welcome to Wells Hall. This is an important event, and it is truly heartening to see you here, to see the presence of students, faculty, community members, educators, activists. Few though we may be, we are all represented. These categories are all represented this morning. So on behalf of the Michigan State University African Studies Center and our collaborating units and community organizations, I am honored to welcome you to this public symposium, Imperialism in Africa, Historical and Contemporary Manifestations. My name is Isaac Kalulu. I serve as Assistant Director of the African Studies Center here at Michigan State University, and I work closely with faculty, students, and community partners to support interdisciplinary research, teaching, and public engagement. All this in terms of Africa and its diaspora. I'm grateful to join you today on these important occasions. And before I go any further, I'd like to share a brief message on behalf of our director, Professor Leo Zulu. Professor Zulu was deeply involved in shaping and organizing this symposium and sends his sincere regrets that he is unable to be with us today due to some urgent professional responsibilities. He sends his warm greetings, his deep appreciation to all of you for attending, and his best wishes for a successful, meaningful, and impactful symposium. We are grateful for his leadership and vision, which continue to guide the work of the African Studies Center at MSU. We are meeting at a point at a moment of extraordinary global uncertainty across regions and continents. We are witnessing intensifying conflicts, humanitarian crises, political polarization, deepening inequalities, and environmental stress. Many of these realities intersect most sharply in Africa. Yet, too often, they are discussed without sufficient historical depth or political clarity. This symposium begins from the recognition that we are confronting today, this symposium begins from the recognition that what we are confronting today did not emerge suddenly, nor are these crises isolated from the global systems of power. This is indeed why we are here today. The symposium asks a central question: how does imperialism, understood not only as a historical force, but as an evolving set of political, economic, and military and cultural practices, continue to shape African realities today? We examine this question across multiple domains, including conflict, climate change, migration, food security, health, education, and emerging technologies. Importantly, we do so by centering African experiences, African agency, and African voices. An African proverb reminds us that until the lion tells its own story, the hunt will always glorify the hunter. Today is about listening more carefully, learning more deeply, and telling fuller stories. This symposium is intentionally public. It is free and open to all because we believe these conversations belong beyond the university. Understanding global power is not the responsibility of scholars alone. It is essential for educators, students, policymakers, activists, and communities to live with the consequences of these systems every day. We are especially grateful to convened scholars, activists, and community organizers in the same space at MSU and with the African Studies Center. We are proud to engage across these boundaries. Knowledge is strongest when it is allowed to travel between classrooms, communities, and movements. I want to highlight our keynote speaker, Professor Nzongola-Ntalaja, who will be addressing us shortly. Professor Nzongola-Ntalaja is a distinguished Congolese historian and political scientist, Professor Emeritus at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and a former president of the African Studies Association. His landmark book, The Congo from Leopold to Kabila, A People's History, remains foundational for understanding imperialism, extraction, and resistance in Central Africa, but also globally. Beyond academia, he has long been a principled public intellectual and advocate of democracy, sovereignty, and human dignity. We are deeply honored by his presence among us today. Just a round of applause. Thank you, Professor Nzongola-Ntalaja, for making the time to be here. Today's program reflects the breadth of this conversation. After the keynote, we will move into a panel and question and answer session addressing interconnected themes such as climate change and conflict, refugee and migration, education, health, food insecurity, and implications of data centers and artificial intelligence for the global south. After lunch, we invite you to take part in facilitated breakout discussions. These sessions are designated not simply to absorb information, but to reflect together, share perspectives, and think concretely about pathways forward. I encourage you to take full advantage of these spaces and to engage with people you may not normally encounter in your work or daily life. Please also take time throughout the day to visit the information and organizational tables that are at the back there. Perhaps there might be some tables from our sponsors. And if they do show up, please visit those tables. Room 108, A108, okay. That's where to go for the sponsors, A108. A symposium of this scale is always a collective effort. We are deeply grateful to our co-sponsoring units and community partners, including MSU Department of History, the MSU Muslim Studies Program, the Political Science Department, Jensen and Global Educators Core Program, the Islamic Center of East Lansing, called Pink Lansing, the Greater Lansing Peace Education Center, and many others who have participated in setting this symposium. I want to extend heartfelt thanks to our organizing committee and to the MSU African Studies Center staff and our main coordinator, Andy Campbell, whose dedication made today possible. Thank you as well for your attendance here today, and we thank panelists, facilitators, volunteers, and students all the same. Most importantly, we are here for a significant conversation, and it is heartening to see that there are those in our community that are taking the time to focus on this important discussion. Let me close with an invitation and a challenge. We invite you to listen generously to ask questions and to reflect on the complexity of the issues at hand. We challenge you to carry what you learn here beyond this roof into your classrooms, your communities, your organizations, and your daily activities. The structures we are examining today are global, but change often begins locally. Through informed solidarity and sustained engagement, we can achieve much. With that, I thank you again for joining us, and I look forward to a powerful day of learning, dialogue, and collective reflection. Welcome. Thank you, and it's my distinct honor now to present to you our esteemed guest, Professor Nzongola-Ntalaja, who will be introduced by Dr. Wiley. We all know Dr. David Wiley, Professor David Wiley, and we are grateful that you are here to do our introduction, and we are thankful for your many years of service at Michigan State University, but indeed throughout the continent of Africa. Your history is one that we cherish and one that in the African studies community is respected, sir. And we thank you that you are continuing to engage in these important Africa conversations. Dr. David Wiley.
Thank you so much, Isaac. And it's a great honor for me to be in this position today. In my 36 years with African Studies at MSU, I do not know any guest visitor, speaker that we have had of the stature and extent of experience that we have of Georges Nzongola, who has come out here to the Wild West, where you never know what the climate will be, from his base at University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, which he is a retired professor. I say that this is an honor because, first of all, I do not know any Africanist professor who has taught in as many places as Georges has. Is quite an extensive list of Howard University, Washington, Atlanta University, University of Maiduguri in Nigeria, University of Wisconsin-Madison, the El Colegio de Mexico, with their African Center there, and at his alma mater, Davidson College, where he was the second Congolese student to come to Davidson and to provide a wedge for the integration of Davidson in a deeply southern site in South Carolina. I also don't know anyone who has participated in as many organizations as an expert consultant on Africa. He was the co-founder of the African Association of Political Science and its deputy president for a while, which was one of the first major social science professional associations to be founded in all of the African continent. He was this year recognized by the extent of that experience and the excellence of his scholarship by the African Studies Association, gave him the African Distinguished Scholar Award of the Year. Beyond that, he was an advisor to presidents in Africa, both in Nigeria and in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which we'll abbreviate today with DRC, and so on. And from that, he served and worked as a consultant and a leader in the African Development Bank, the African Union, the African Peer Review Mechanism, where he was chosen by the citizens of Africa to be their representative in plotting a future for African development. With the Rockefeller Foundation, the Social Science Research Council, the Swedish Agency for Research Cooperation, UNESCO, and United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. He also was the ambassador to the United Nations from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which reflects the respect that he gained in his own country for his speaking out for justice and democracy and equality. I could go on with a long list of the European places that he has served in Oslo and elsewhere. But let me just jump to say, this keynote speaker of this forum, Professor Nzongola-Ntalaja, brings unparalleled experience on the historical and contemporary dynamics of imperialism in Africa, which continues in many ways still today. This perspective offers participants a critical framework for understanding current crises, particularly in the DRC, while connecting these struggles to broader global systems of power, inequality, and resistance. My favorite African proverb is that those who never visit think their mother is the only cook. And we have a good maitre d' of African politics here to guide us in getting ready to be activists in order to stand up for freedom, democracy, and equality in Africa, and to fight against the current policies that are being used to subjugate Africa to a new imperialism. Georges Nzongola, welcome.
Thank you very much for the introductions. I'm really pleased to be here. This is my third time to give a lecture at this great university. My first two okay. I came here when I was professor at Howard University in Washington. I came twice to give lectures about the African Union. Since I've been at North Carolina, I haven't been here. This is my first time. Although I am retired at North Carolina. I'd like to thank Dr. Isaac Kalumbu for his introduction as well. He's a person who reminds me of my country, because we have people who have his names in my country, Congo. We are all Bantu people. And when he told me his name, I thought, oh, he said Congolese. He said, no, it's Zimbabwe. So I'm very happy because I spent 2 years in Zimbabwe and I worked there and I really like the country very, very much. I think I need my glasses so I can read this paper much better. I'm very grateful to Professor Leo Sulu, Director of the MSU African Studies Center, and with the colleagues, among them 2 professors emeritus, David Wiley and John Metzer, who have helped to strengthen the work of the center. The task of the center has asked me to deal with a keynote to a forum on historical and contemporary manifestations of imperialism in Africa is quite a challenge. Although I am not a historian, I am pleased that the Z Books editors of my major book decided on the title, The Congo from Leopold to Kabila, a people's historian, a people's history. And the book won the best prize of the year 2004 from the African Politics Conference Group, an organization of political scientists specializing in African politics, and an affiliate of both the African Studies Association and the American Political Science Association. Thus, even though I earned my doctorate in political science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 1975, much of my scholarly work has been on the political history of Africa in general and my own country, of the Democratic Republic of the Congo in particular. My presentation will be divided into 4 sections. 1, Africa and the world from the 15th to the 19th century, during which the transatlantic slave trade was the prelude to historical imperialism from 1440 to 1888. 2, imperialism in its contemporary historical and contemporary manifestations in Africa. 3, the Leopoldian Free State of the Congo, 1885 to 1908. And 4, the forgotten genocide of the Congo by Rwanda since 1995. Given the shortness of the 40 minutes that I must present my lecture, more questions and answers may be better discussed in afternoon breakout sessions. The transatlantic slave trade. My first lesson on Africa in a global system at both Howard University, 1978 to 1997. I did 19 years at Howard, and also I'm a Professor Emeritus at Howard University for my years I was there. And the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, 2007 to 2024, were 3 words: Africa, capitalism, and globalization. The latter was the more important of the 3. What is globalization? There is no single definition of globalization. My favorite definition is the one by the Nobel laureate in economics and Harvard philosopher Amartya Sen, who defines globalization as a historical process that has been going on for thousands of years, quote, through travel, trade, migration, spread of cultural influences, and dissemination of knowledge and understanding, including of science and technology, end of quote. Capitalist globalization has its roots in mercantilism, the linking of economic and political power, which allowed countries with advances in maritime navigation technology like Portugal and others to engage in long-distance voyages in search of colonies and wealth. From the 15th century of the Christian era, Africa has been an integral part of this process, which eventually led to the European conquest of the Americans, the enslavement of Africans to generate minerals and crops that were to nurture industrialization and develop an economic system in which Europe developed while Africa continued sinking into underdevelopment. Following their confrontation with Muslim Arabs, Europeans made their presence felt in Africa during the era of the merchant capital, 1415 to 1800, beginning of the Portuguese occupation of Ceuta and Melilla in Morocco. The roots of the transatlantic slave trade are to be found in this Portuguese incursion in Africa during the 15th century. From Morocco, they moved down the Atlantic coast to Senegal By the 1440s, pardon me, they had come to conclude that there was not as much gold in West Africa as they had imagined. Their initial interest in the gold trade eventually gave way to human trafficking in enslaved Africans from around 1440 off the coast of Senegal to 1888, date of the abolition of slavery in Brazil. From West Africa, they extended their domain to Central, Southern, and East Africa. As for Africa and capitalism, another Harvard professor, Frederick Cooper, gives credit to Karl Marx of having clearly identified the brutal dawn of capitalism with his concept of primitive accumulation, which is defined as the separation of the majority of producers from the means of production, especially land. Here is the relevant passage from Marx's own writings, quote, "The discovery of gold and silver in America, the extirpation, enslavement, and enthronement in mines of the aboriginal populations, the beginning of the conquest and looting of the East Indies, the turning of Africa into warren for the commercial hunting of black skins, signaled the rosy dawn of the era of capitalist production. These idyllic proceedings are the chief momenta of primitive accumulation," end of quote, by Marx and Engels. Marx places Africa, and particularly the transatlantic slave trade, at the very center of the evolution of capitalism as an economic system, and plantation slavery as the sine qua non of Western capitalist accumulation and the success of capitalist globalization. The British, the French, the Portuguese, and the other Europeans who rushed into the scramble for Africa in the 19th century had for long been attracted to Africa for gold, for which the continent was the major supplier to Europe before the conquest of the Americas. The need for labor on plantations and in mines in America forced them to enslave Black Africans. The first European to come to the region where the Congo River enters the embouchure of the Atlantic Ocean towards the end of the 15th century was the Portuguese mariner Diego Cao, who arrived there on January 1, 1483. This wonderful site was known to people of the Congo Kingdom and its neighbors in what is now Angola and Congo-Brazzaville are today for centuries. In 1491, Christianity came to the Congo Kingdom, baptized the king Nzinga Nguvu. This is the eldest son, Mvemba Yazinga, who adopted the name of Afonso and other members of the royal family. When Afonso became king in 1509, he changed the name of the kingdom capital from Mbanza, Congo, to São Salvador, and sent Henrique, his first son, and other members of the royal family to Portugal for education. After his 15 years of study, Henrique was elevated by Pope X in Rome as Bishop of Utica, a city that was second only to Carthage in northern Tunisia in 1518. Bishop Henrique was the first cleric of his rank in Africa south of Ethiopia. As you know, Ethiopia was the second Christian area in Africa after Egypt. And of course, much of the rest of Africa came out later. And the most highly educated Congo was this Ben Henrique. So all of these events that I have decided, I have talked about concerning the slave trade was very, very important in terms of making the way for imperialism. So historical and contemporary manifestations of imperialism in Africa. Historians of imperialism have described the period since the British abolition of the slave trade in 1807, and particularly beginning of the British annexation of Lagos in what is now Nigeria in 1861, as a period of informal empire under the ideological justification of legitimate commerce. What is the importance of these two terms, informal empire and legitimate commerce? Informal empire meant that although African rulers in strategically located areas like major ports and large regional markets would still rule over their domains, their decisions regarding economic and international relations were either imposed or influenced by European military officers, merchants, or missionaries. Without treaties and other forms of agreement, these rulers were already losing important parcels of their power. As for legitimate commerce, on the other hand, it was the term used to distinguish the now illegal slave trade with trade involves raw materials, essentials for the production needs of industrial capital, such as minerals, palm products, cocoa, peanuts, cotton, ivory, rubber, etc. Having been introduced to new commodities other than those that had dominated the triangular trade, like tobacco, cane, rice, and cotton, Europeans were eager to lay their hands on them to further develop their industries. As competition between Europeans intensified, the cost of doing business with African states also increased, particularly with regard to demands by African rulers for guns and support in armed conflicts between African states. As a result, a consensus emerged among Europeans that it would be in their best interest to replace African sovereignty with European control. Two dates were very important in this process. 1830, all of you know what 1830 is, the French conquest of Algiers, following by massive European settlement on the Mediterranean coast of Algeria. And 1861, the British annexation of Lagos, already mentioned before, with their control over maritime ports on the Atlantic and Indian Ocean coast. The British in Freetown, Accra, and Lagos, and the Portuguese on the Mozambican coast. European powers created spheres of influence in strategic locations while leaving political control to African states in most areas. Each European power attempted to secure for itself a monopoly over lucrative sources of raw materials and important trade routes in Africa. through direct control over a few strategic colonies and informal control over weak states in coastal areas. Europeans gradually and informal control over weak states in coastal areas. Europeans gradually began laying the groundwork for their eventual control and occupation of Africa. Then came real imperialism and the European scramble for Africa, beginning with the Berlin Conference in Germany from 15 November 1884 to 26 February 1885. It was attended by 14 countries: Austria-Hungary, Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, Great Britain, Italy, the Netherlands, Portugal, Russia, Spain, Sweden, Norway. As you know, at this time, Sweden and Norway were one country because Norway had been a colony of Denmark. Then they gave it over to the Swedes, and they became independent in 1905. As a matter of fact, I was representing the United Nations in Norway in 2005 when Norway was celebrating the 100 years of their independence. It was quite really very, very interesting to be there to see that. After Norway was Turkey and the United States, formerly known as the Berlin Conference on West Africa. It was referred to in much of the European press as the Congo Conference. Imagine, this was the Congo Conference. It was not a conference for the whole of Africa. Since two of the three agenda items dealt with freedom of navigation on the Congo and Niger rivers, and freedom of trade in the Congo Basin. These were the two major events. In the conference, if the conference did not formally draw up on the continent's borders, as it is widely believed, as a matter of fact, there was no dividing of Africa at Berlin, as most people say. The dividing came after Berlin, not at Berlin. The conference simply did one thing that's very important, was the third agenda item of the Berlin Conference. What was it? The effective occupation. What does occupation mean? The idea was that the solution of the third agenda item was the rules of the game for territorial claims and acquisition in Africa. Now, what was the scramble? Frederick Cooper provides a useful working definition as a quote, preemptive colonization by competing empires, each trying to prevent others from controlling access to tropical raw materials and markets that had been managed via trade relations of Africans along the coast for many years, end of quote. It took place peacefully following the test of effective occupation. In other words, when a country can indicate that it has control of a territory, but it has merchants, it has missionaries and so on, it is very territorial, and that's it. And if no one else could come to try to take that territory, which they have taken over, except for the British veto over Portugal, the Portugal plan to have a contiguous territory from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean, comprising Angola and Mozambique. The British told him that, hell no, you can't do that. we want was two territories of Zambia and Zimbabwe. So we're gonna to give you that territory. And the other major event, confrontation, was the French and British in Fashoda, present-day Kodok in South Sudan. David Leveling Lewis' book, a very interesting book which you should read, The Race to Fashoda, European Colonialism and African Resistance in a Scramble for Africa, offers an excellent analysis of the Fashoda incident and its deeper historical significance. This abandoned Egyptian fort on the Nile served as a symbol of the rivalry among the powers involved in the scramble for Africa, including King Leopold's Congo Free State. They wanted to get there, to get on the Nile as well. Ethiopia tried the same thing. Italy tried the same thing. And Britain told them, no, it is for us. So only Britain became the master of Fashoda, and not these other countries. And the two major colonial powers of Britain and France confronted each other militarily, but no shot was fired as the French retreated in the face of overwhelming British superiority in personnel and firepower. Did Africans resist to the colonial conquest? Yes, indeed. This happened all over the continent, from North Africa to Southern Africa, from West to East Africa, and in Central Africa as well. Not to forget rebellions by enslaved Africans on slave ships and on prison-like plantations. Colonized Africans were subjected to cultural oppression, white supremacy, and colonial racism. As defined in my book, The Congo from Leopold to Kabila, A People's History, cultural oppression is called the negation and, where possible, the destruction of the cultural values and institutions of an enslaved, politically dominated people, end of quote. As part of the ideology of racism and white supremacy, it consisted of racial segregation and the color bar, as well as condescending behavior towards African, including corporal punishment and slights and insults of all kinds on a daily basis. Worse than all the above is the first genocide of the 20th century in the German colony called German Southwest Africa from 1884. The German authorities wanted to create a German heaven by encouraging settlers to move to Namibia with much of the best land for railway line, mines, vast cultural potential, and accessible land. The number of settler farms increased to the point where cattle ranches were on land occupied by Bushmen. The government and the settlers found it necessary to kill as many Herero and Namakwa San in the genocide of 1904 to 1907. King Leopold's brutal and predatory rule. King Leopold II was born in 1835, the first son of Leopold I, and a cousin of Queen Victoria of England. He grew with great passion for the acquisition of overseas colonies, which he considered as indispensable for the country's greatness. As a relatively new state created after the Belgian Revolution of 1830, and establishment of a constitutional monarchy, the following years, Belgium's political class shunned imperialist quarrels over colonies. But the nation's king started plotting to acquire one after his accession to the throne in 1865, sorry, not 1865. By 1878, a committee of studies and Upper Congo studies was created to promote Leopold's interest in the Congo Basin. Henry Morton Stanley, the Welsh-American journalist, was hired as the king's colonial agent in the Congo, where he established administrative posts manned by European agents and negotiated so-called treaties with African traditional rulers, most of whom could not read or write. These rulers placed next to their names signed away their lands to the International Association of the Congo, which had succeeded the International Organization for the Upper Congo Studies. Stanley's imposture was how Leopold's territorial claims to the Congo Basin were approved by the major powers, beginning with the United States in April 1884. As a matter of fact, the United States was the first country in the world to recognize Belgium's claim to the Congo. And up to today, the United States tells us what to do. And of course, even Mr. Trump is now the main guy who wants to take over all our minerals and everything. So this was probably the first time in history that a presumably research organization, the so-called Committee of Studies of Upper Congo Studies. So this organization, which was a research organization, became now a state and now could be recognized around the world as a state. And of course, this was probably the first time in history that a presumably research organization was recognized as a sovereign state. Although it was only the last day of the conference, 26 February 1965, that German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck read a letter from King Leopold stating that all the countries of the conference except Turkey have accepted Belgium king's claim to the Congo. For the distinguished Belgian historian Jean Strangers, on the other hand, if the delegates had affirmed by their standing ovation, the recognition remained unmentioned as a binding decision in the General Act of Berlin that followed the meeting. Leopold quickly pushed a resolution allowing him to be sovereign of two countries, in other words, sovereign of Belgium and sovereign of the Congo. Simultaneously, though his nation's parliament did not like the idea, but of course they ended up accepting it. By 29 May 1885, a royal decree proclaimed the existence of the Congo Free State. The people of the Congo were not consulted in the proclamation of an alien state, not in the naming of a new absolute ruler who would never set foot in their land, and after his accession on the 1st of August 1885. The results were catastrophic. Stranger also observes that Leopold owned the Congo in the same way that John Rockefeller owned Standard Oil. He was an absentee landlord who used the labor of his newly enslaved subjects to produce the maximum quantity of resources needed to satisfy his enrichment needs. The European administrators of the Congo Free State were paid bonuses tied to productivity and used violence and intimidation to work people to death, particularly in a collection of ivory and wild rubber. Failure to meet the required quota of rubber for each village, for instance, resulted in women and children being held hostage until it was met. The women were generally subject to rape and other forms of violence, while children faced torture of hours without food or water. The king's agents, the African sentries, and the Europeans charged with overseeing rubber collection and the mercenaries of the force publique or of the state militia are committed, the mercenaries of the committed to unspeakable and heinous crimes, including extrajudicial execution and arbitrary cutting off people's hands, including those of children. But millions of the people of the Congo suffered and died. And even then, an international outcry against this brutal colonial system led to its end in 1908. Leopold was compensated handsomely for losing and overseeing a kingdom that was 83 times the size of Belgium. The Belgium's monarchy remained inconsolable, and he took revenge to having his Congo taken away by burning the Congo Free State archives, an operation that took 8 days. He did not want posterity to know what he did with his Congo, but alternative sources of information about his rule do remain overvaluable to researchers today. It is an irony of history that Leopold used wealth from the Congo Free State for the construction of public works, urban projects, and private properties for himself in Belgium and elsewhere. Yet these monuments in his honor in Belgium, which are now proving so controversial, were erected only after the international condemnation of his abuses and atrocities in the Congo had died down. People running away from state and company violence for fear or punishment in a collection of rubber and ivory do even end seeking refuge in the forest, where they ended up dying because of attacks by bestial animals, snakes, insects, and sleeping under the cold. Such deaths have been estimated close to 10 million people under King Leopold II. The forgotten what is the word for genocide? Okay, the forgotten genocide in the DRC by Rwanda since 1995. In 1996, Rwanda and Uganda started the first Congo War to remove President Mobutu Sese Seko from power and replace him with Laurent Desire Kabila. When the 7-month war ended with Mobutu's demise, his departure was approved by the United States. Both President Paul Kagame of Rwanda and President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda did not know how Kabila knew how to tell people what they liked to hear. Since he did not have an army capable of overthrowing Mobutu, he had to play the game with his two princes, one means Kagame and Museveni, to help him to overthrow Mobutu. He had to play the game with his two sponsors and accept them, Colonel James Kabarebe, now General Kabarebe, a Rwandan Patriotic Army officer, to become the chief of staff of the Congolese army. Can you believe that? A soldier from Rwanda becoming the head of the army in the Congo. And of course, Kabila accepted that. And of course, after the whole year, he found out that most Congolese were really ashamed for that kind of thing. So he decided to get rid of the Rwandans. And this, of course, brought to his death because they ended up killing him in 2001, January 2001. And of course, he had the Rwandans and the Ugandans get out of the Congo in 1998, but then they came back to the Congo on 2nd August 1998 to wage war. Fortunately, Zimbabwe, Angola, and Namibia helped Laurent Kabila as young army to push the invading countries of Rwanda and Uganda out of most of the DRC. They succeeded in sponsoring Congolese rebels in eastern DRC from Goma to Busha to attempt to overthrow, but then not the Zimbabwe, but the Rwandans and Ugandans did come, so get Congolese who were in Goma and Bunia area to continue working against Kabila. And of course, he was assassinated on 16th of January 2001, and his son, Joseph Kabila, succeeded him as president of the Congo, where he stayed for 18 years. And of course, this guy is not really a Congolese. He's basically a Rwandan because he was, he may have been a son to Kabila, but his father was not really a Congolese, was a Rwandan. But Kabila was really fond on him, and that's why he made him, he was very close to him. And but Kabila was working for Rwanda, not for the Congo, because he used to give Kagame millions of money, some even billions were given to him every year. And of course, he also infiltrated our army of Rwandan elements, that even he could have sergeants of the Rwandan army were brought into the Congo as colonels or even generals, the army. And this was in our army. As a matter of fact, when I was ambassador in New York, I raised this question of the fact that our army is infiltrated, and the president called me back to Kinshasa to say, why did you say that in public? I said, Mr. President, this is known by everybody. I can even think that I'm the only person, you know. And of course, now he's talking about this infiltration, but it was there all the time. And yet it's one of the major problems why our country is not possible to defend itself against Rwanda. Anyway, Kagame has done many kind of lies about our country. One of his lies was that we were supporting this group called the Forces of Liberation of Rwanda, Democratic Forces of Liberation of Rwanda, which is the Hutu, who had participated in the genocide of 1994. And yet these people have no power, there's no way that they can fight against Rwanda. And the Rwandese use them simply to use it as a kind of thing to make the people in European Union, others who don't want to read the truth, to accept all the nonsense that Rwanda has been telling them. The second was that the Rwandans in the Congo are at risk, which is not true. The Rwandans in the Congo are Congolese like everybody else. As a matter of fact, the chief of staff of our president is a Rwandan. We have ministers, even ministers of very, very high positions who are Rwandans. So we don't understand how they can say that we are against, we have hate against the Tutsi in the Congo. That is not true at all. So all of these are simply lies that Kagame takes to get his friends in Europe, including the United States, especially the people like Clinton and others were supporting of Rwanda, and were really holding on to him. On February 1, 2023, on the second day of his 6-day trip to the DRC and South Sudan, Pope Francis, in his message in Kinshasa, called attention to the forgotten genocide in the Congo. He could not understand how the international community can simply not do anything about this genocide. Well, over 10 million people have been killed in the Congo by Rwanda, and nothing has been done. When I was in the US, the United States, Britain, and France really hated me for raising this issue of genocide. And they even made our president to remove me from because they were afraid that they don't want to be not taken into the hands of the Americans, British, and French. They had to move me. He gave me another post in Pretoria, South Africa. Then he decided to take away from me. And he keeps telling me he's going to give another post and he won't give another one. but he knows that I don't accept things, but they not make sense. Anyway, the genocide in the DRC has been going on for 31 years, with over 10 million women, children, and men killed, simply because Kagame wants to get our resources. He's made Kagame, Rwanda, a very, very rich country. He has done a lot of good roads, lots of development and all of that, also money from the Congo. He takes some of the best things coming out of our mines and so on, and does not want to give out. Anyway, we see the agreement between the United States is likely to bring us some hope, but we don't know because Trump is somebody who's we can't really count on him. Anyway, the international community does not like to hear the word genocide because that will bring them to take action about it. Rwanda and Kagame have committed all the 3 categories of crimes in international law: crimes against humanity, crimes of war, and crimes of genocide. Another crime to add to Rwanda's activities in the Congo is the looting of our minerals, forests, and national parks. Great agricultural products like cocoa, coffee, and others. Billions of dollars are ought to develop our economy are looted by Rwanda. In conclusion, I hope that I have outlined the most important issues that I was asked to lecture on. Given the shortness of time, it's good for me to end here and engage in other discussions later on. Thank you.